Hello, welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Thank you for coming to this beautiful spot by the river to celebrate the publication of One Day I Will Go There, Suzanne Verrall's first published collection of poems. It's really important to celebrate good work, and I'm completely thrilled to be leading you in this celebration. Almost 7 years ago, Suzanne and I were sitting in my back garden having a cup of tea, and she told me she brought some writing to show me. Now, we'd already discussed the fact that we both identified as artists, but there'd been no evidence to prove that this was true. So, of course, I wanted to read Suzanne's work. I'm always interested in the creative pursuits of others, and it's always an intense delight to be moved to laughter or fury or wonder or tears by the cleverness of another artist's work. We'd already discussed on another occasion how neither of us like or appreciate back patters. You know those people who their default position is, that's great, you're great, that's fabulous, you're awesome, amazing. Feedback without substance is deeply unsatisfying. But it's also really tricky when you're put on the spot. What if it's terrible? What if I hate it? I realised that we were both holding our breath for a little to see what my reaction would be. But after reading a dozen or so of Suzanne's 150-word flash fictions, they had been her focus for a while, I knew that I had some pretty solid evidence of Suzanne's skill as a writer, not to mention her great insight into her wit, my great insight into her wit and intelligence, and her ability to shape really big ideas with few words, and to make me laugh. As a lover of story, particularly short story, I remember feeling pretty confident that my feedback was well considered, well articulated, and well received. Now, I would generally consider myself to be an artist in the visual and musical sense, but I was keeping to the theme of the written word, so one day I said to Suzanne, again in the backyard, having a cup of tea, that I was going to show her some of my poems. And some had written ages ago, they were in response to some writing, some travelling I'd done, and some were really recent. And to my surprise, and I must confess to my great annoyance, Suzanne said she didn't know what to say, because she didn't know what to think. She said, I don't know anything about poetry. So I may have, at that point, suggested that maybe she needed to learn, as I wasn't going to let her get away with that. Challenge accepted, this started an intense period of learning where Suzanne started researching, reading and critically analysing poetry. Classic and contemporary, Mexican, Spanish, American, Canadian, British, Australian, First Nations. In a short period of time, Suzanne knew more about poetry than I'd ever known, and it was she who began introducing me to a new world of poets. Apart from impressing me with her capacity for critical reading, when Suzanne started writing poems, as what at first seemed like an experiment or an academic exercise designed to increase her understanding of what the hell poetry was about, she nailed it. The poems Suzanne started writing were good. They were really good. And then she started putting them out into the world, getting published in online and print journals all over the place, the UK, US, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. This journey of deep scholarship, this playful experimentation with form and style has led us to where we are today. When Suzanne sent her manuscript to Vagabond, a literary press with a more than 20-year commitment to publishing, with works that have won most of the major literary prizes in Australia, I know that I held my breath for some months, waiting for a response. Getting published by them would really mean something, not least an acknowledgement that Suzanne's work would then be validated in an Australian context, because there's nothing like being acknowledged for your good work at home. One of the poets that we discovered in those early days was Billy Collins. He'd been the Poet Laureate of the US from 2001 to 2003. His words, "Someone inside me will not get off his tricycle," begin part one of One Day I Will Go There. Poet Laureate, imagine that. Imagine living in a country where arts had as much clout as agriculture, mining and gambling. When Vagabond, like hundreds of other Australian arts organisations, did not win another round of vital funding for this year, the editor Michael Brennan posted, "Our application was rejected, the government preferring guns and roses to Australian poetry," which is just one of those life choices we all have to make eventually. Michael went on to lead a GoFundMe campaign which successfully raised enough funds for the 2022 season to publish the work of 5 Australian poets, including Suzanne. I know that there are many people in this room who contributed to that, and I want to say thank you. Perhaps when we have a change of government next month, funding for the arts might again become something that we as a country see as vital, and perhaps we might start this new dawn with the appointment of Poets Laureate in every town and city across Australia. I passionately believe that arts are essential to our existence. The arts help us to notice, to understand the complexities of the world, making it a little easier to find our way. This collection of poems by Suzanne is beautiful and an important contribution. I'd like to quote Billy Collins one last time in a letter that he wrote to Suzanne. This is part of what he said. "People do send me their books of poems, but rarely are they as delightfully odd as yours. Curious, surprising, quirky, yet succinct, and made of simple language. You have a career ahead of you. Thank you for the joy of reading you." Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Verrall.
After that chili bean lunch, I have wind. I stride through the park, releasing soft bursts, like a plucky blue sailboat, doing its best to outrun a storm. Or a piglet in the back of a truck, filled with piglets, fantasising about slipping out on the way to the abattoir. That poem is called Getting Away With It, and it's on page 62 of One Day I Will Go There. Thank you all for coming today. It's really overwhelming and nerve-wracking to see you all here smiling at me and sending me your love and support, and I really appreciate it. Thank you in particular to a few people. Thank you to Vicky Bennett, Demetra, Susan and Neil for your long-standing interest and encouragement. Thank you to Jenny Toon, who's not here today, my writing pen pal. And thank you to Ian McLeod for being my feedback reader. Thank you also to Alice Allen for being a feedback reader and for providing the fabulous quote on the back of the book. Alice is a Melbourne-based poet, and she has a poetry podcast called Poetry Says, poetrysays.com, and it's a great resource. Thank you to Michael Brennan of Vagabond Books. The poems I write are not fashionable in the current milieu of Australian poetry. They're not identity poems, they're not memoir, they're not overtly political, they're not erudite, they're not even particularly poetic. So Michael has taken a fabulous risk in deciding to publish this collection, and I'm really grateful to him. Thank you to Pip Williams, who 10 years ago introduced me to the genre of flash fiction, which, as it happens, is the perfect way to practice writing poetry when you don't know you're practicing writing poetry. Thank you to Shirley, my mum. The first poem in the book is literally the truth. And finally, thank you to Danny Burbrook. First, for that lovely introduction. Very kind. And moreover, thank you to Danny for, over these past few years, coming with me on this poetry learning quest and listening to me bemoan poetry and hate poetry and love poetry and not understand poetry and have my hair coming out in clumps over poetry and then writing really bad poetry and listening to it and still smiling. Thank you. This poem is for you. Cold Night. The water on the glass, I'm going to start that again. The water in the glass on the bedside table has frozen over. I drill a hole through the centre with a corkscrew and spend the night on a camp stool, ice fishing in the bedroom, fending off seals while you sleep. Anyone here today who knows me at all will be totally shocked to learn that I do not like being the centre of attention. Today I'm having to suck it up. But I don't like talking about myself. It's one of the ways I am my own worst enemy. The extortionist. My own toe sent to me in the mail. The ransom note demanding payment for the safe return of the rest of me. It had to be me doing this to myself. The postmark was local and I recognised the handwriting. Not all of my poems are autobiographical, but they are all personal. Chickens are curious creatures. Out at Two Wells where I work, a lot of people keep chooks, and I've heard on more than one occasion stories of how a certain hen has decided to befriend a member of the family and follow them around and wait by the gate for them to get home and scratch at the door and come in and watch TV with them and so forth. Now, chickens have a shorter life expectancy than human beings, so invariably these birds die. And I started to wonder what it would be like if it was the other way around. This poem is called Drowning. It's very tragic. The chicken followed the man like a dog. When he was caught in a rip and dragged out to sea, she haunted the dunes, clucking, clucking, till a feral cat, here comes the tragedy, till a feral cat put her out of her misery and 2 crows polished off the eggs. We are in a housing crisis in Australia. Sale prices are through the roof. Rents are going up, unaffordable, even if you can find somewhere to rent. Families are living in caravan parks. I myself had a period of couch surfing in my mid-40s, thank you, Jake. Older women are fast becoming the new homeless statistic, and I think we're all a lot closer to living out of our cars than perhaps we care to think about. And when you don't have safe, secure housing, it does something to you here and here. This poem is called Public Asset. Oh, and it may help to think of the zoo in the poem as a metaphor for the world. Public asset. I live in a zoo. It closed down years ago when all the animals died. There is no funding. I can barely keep a roof over my head playing hopscotch up the polished concrete walls. Ever since coming across David Hume in first year philosophy, I've been really attracted to the idea of causality as somehow spooky, as not so much a function of the physical world as Newton would have us believe, but of the metaphysical world. I think to some degree we maybe acknowledge that when we say things like everything happens for a reason. We're sort of talking about the interrelatedness of all things. This is a Semaphore Road poem. It's called Cause and Effect. A woman draws a face in the froth of her latte with the handle of a spoon, while the man from the home sits at the next table, coughing and feeding crumbs from his pockets to the sparrows. As a school child finds $1 on the ground and buys a chocolate bar, which normally costs $2, but today is half price. You will find an overrepresentation of cats in this story, in this collection. That's because, having grown up with no cats at all, I now live in a household with 17 cats. His name is Leo. Daylight saving. That time the horizon came loose from its mountains, the sinking sun got caught. Dusk lasted for days. There was much yowling, and later many kittens. Since the collection has come out, people have been saying to me, so I guess you've been writing poetry for like forever? And I say no, only the last 5 or 6 years. So I was going through my old files in preparation for today, and I have a confession to make. Contagious magazine, 1992. Your Garden, 1994. Australian Women's Book Review, 1996. So apparently I've been writing poetry for longer than I thought, and I didn't remember because I didn't like poetry, I didn't understand poetry, I didn't read poetry. Then in 2016, as we've heard, after a conversation with Danny, I started to read poetry. I started with poets that Danny knew, Pablo Neruda, Octavio Paz. I moved on to poets I had heard of, Dorothy Porter, Maya Angelou, and then I started to discover poets, Sharon Olds, Udru Nunako, and so on. Without any plan at all, except to be a sponge, my learning curve was like that. Extracurricular. I am taking night classes to learn to speak whale. That's whale the animal, not whale the siren. I was studying extracurricular. I am taking night classes to learn to speak whale. There are headphones and field recordings. Lots of one-on-one time. It's very good value for money. At home, I put my lips to the shower drain and practice my accent. So, what was the result of reading all that poetry? Poetry New Zealand Yearbook, 2017. Australian Poetry Journal, Fragile Anthology, Alchemy Anthology, Friendly Street Poets, Adelaide. 14 Magazine, Gateway Review, Millennial Pulp, Ellipsis, Literature and Art. And you know what? I found poetry, writing poetry, to be a really pleasurable experience. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It makes me happy. For a lump of sugar. The donkey shot out of the cannon, flew hee-hawing clear across town, landing in the pocket handkerchief garden of the aged care facility. Now its ghost gives rides to the old folk who died in their beds, and the living flowers taste of honey. The other thing people have now been saying to me is, What sort of poems do you write? And I, expansive as ever, shrug my shoulders and go, short? Because they are. I will have you know, at $25 a pop, one day I will go there, works out to less than 31 cents a poem. And if you are paying today's concession price, that is less than 25 cents a poem. So buy one for yourself and one for your mum or a friend. And while you're at it, please pick up one of these Big Sneeze flyers, free of charge. There's some on the counter here and over on the table over there, I think. This is a story that I wrote a little while ago, and Danny has done a beautiful audio production of it. So it's Danny's voice reading, and then she is backed by that traditional combo of electronic bass, pizza box and mouth trumpet, and it's a lot of fun. So there's a little QR code, scan that, you can hear Danny's production, Bluetooth it in the car on the way home. So, back to the collection. What are the poems about? Enter the 1987 Anthology of Australian Poetry, edited by Stephen Dando Collins. In it, in the biographical notes at the back on page 409, I have said, I am interested in writing about psychological aspects of existence. I am interested in writing about psychological aspects of existence. Apparently, I haven't changed a bit in 35 years. Where do we go from here? This poem imagines one possible future. Tree. I reincarnate as a hat stand in an antique store, shapely as a tree. Gold lettering on the window, tin toys in a display case, a racing car, a monkey with a drum, no hats. And on that cheery note, I'd like to thank you all for coming very much. Thank you for listening. Please stick around, buy lots of books, have a coffee or warm beverage on us. Enjoy the beautiful spread that has been put out there by the lovely people from Folklore Cafe. Isn't this a beautiful, beautiful place to be? We spotted a dolphin before you all arrived, but maybe it'll come back. I don't know. So just looking around the room right now, I can see a whole bunch of artists, musicians, photographers, filmmakers, painters, drawers, sculptors, poets, writers. Steve's just published his first novel. The arts is a really important part of this community and of being a human being. And I want to thank you all for coming and supporting today, which is not just about me, and it's not about me at all. It's about this little book that I've now lost. It's about this little book here. But it's also about the arts and how they make us understand our world and do better in it. This last poem that I would like to read is not in the collection, probably because it's too long to fit. Don't worry, it's still short. But it's about poetry. So I think it's a lovely way to end, because it could also be about any kind of the arts, I think. A poem is not a tree. It does not bear fruit. It does not provide shade in harsh weathers. A poem does not grow, does not change the shape of a horizon, does not make a garden or line a city street. A poem does not give reason for people to gather together to share a meal or an idea. A poem doesn't provide the opportunity to climb up high and peer over walls and barriers into other people's lives. A poem doesn't root down deep into the earth where existence is visceral and words are not invented. And it doesn't send its seeds out on the wind. A poem does not provide wood for the furnace, or the furniture, or the building of a house. You cannot go to sea in a poem. A poem, when sharpened, will not kill a nation, or a man, or a child. It will not become a stake through the heart. It will not provide a home for birds and other creatures. A poem will not support life. A poem has not life, is not life, has no life. A poem is not a tree.